Here's something most people over 50 have never been told. The breakfast you eat this morning is quietly shaping how your brain will function 10 years from now. Not your genetics, not just your age, your breakfast. A large body of research out of institutions studying aging and cognition has found that what happens at your kitchen table in the first hour after waking may influence memory, focus, and even the risk of cognitive decline later in life. And most people are making the same 3 or 4 mistakes without realizing it. It's not because they're careless. It's because the foods in question have been marketed to us for decades as healthy, light, or heart smart. Cereal boxes with heart check logos, fat-free yogurt cups, fruit juice labeled 100% natural. These products fill grocery store shelves specifically because they look like the responsible choice. But when researchers look closely at what these breakfasts actually do inside the aging brain, how they affect blood sugar, inflammation, and the delicate blood vessels that feed brain tissue, the picture looks very different from the one on the packaging. In the next half hour, I'm going to walk you through exactly what a brain protective breakfast looks like, section by section, ingredient by ingredient. We'll talk about which common breakfast habits may be working against you, why they seemed like the smart choice for so long, and what the science actually shows happens in your brain within hours of eating them. By the end, you'll have a complete practical blueprint, one single breakfast bowl built from ordinary grocery store ingredients that pulls together nearly everything current research suggests supports a sharper, more resilient brain as we age. And stick around for the third item because it's something sitting in almost every senior's refrigerator right now, and very few people understand what it's actually doing to their memory. Let's get into it. Cognitive decline doesn't arrive overnight. It isn't like a broken hip or a heart attack, something sudden that sends you to the emergency room. It builds quietly over 10, 20, even 30 years through thousands of small biological events that most of us never notice happening. Every day, your brain is dealing with tiny amounts of oxidative stress, small flickers of inflammation, and shifts in blood sugar that ripple through blood vessels no wider than a strand of hair. On their own, any single one of these events is meaningless. Your brain is remarkably resilient, and it's built to handle daily wear and tear. The problem is repetition. When the same stressors happen morning after morning, year after year, they accumulate. And breakfast, because it's the meal that sets your blood sugar and inflammation levels for the first several hours of your day, plays an outsized role in that accumulation. This matters because the brain is not like other organs. It uses roughly 20% of the body's energy despite being a small fraction of body weight, and it is exquisitely sensitive to its blood supply. Any diet pattern that affects blood vessel health, and breakfast choices absolutely do, has a direct line to brain health. I want to be clear about something before we go further. This is not about fear. It's not about telling you that a bowl of cereal is going to cause dementia. Cognitive health is influenced by dozens of factors: genetics, sleep, physical activity, social connection, stress, and yes, diet. No single meal determines your fate, but of all the factors within our control, diet is one of the most modifiable, and breakfast is often the most overlooked. Most of us think carefully about lunch and dinner, but breakfast tends to run on autopilot, the same 3 or 4 items eaten out of habit rather than intention. That's exactly why it deserves a closer look. Before we go further, let me tell you a little about where this information comes from, because I think it matters. I trained in internal medicine and spent the better part of 2 decades working at the intersection of clinical nutrition and brain aging, first in hospital-based practice and later focused on research. Over that time, I've had the chance to follow the scientific literature on diet and cognitive health as it's evolved. From early observational studies noticing patterns in certain populations to more rigorous controlled trials that have started to explain why those patterns exist. Everything I'm going to share with you today is grounded in peer-reviewed research published in respected medical and nutrition journals, along with guidance from established organizations that study aging and brain health. I'm not going to reference any single miracle study or make claims that go beyond what the current evidence actually supports. Where the science is strong, I'll tell you. Where it's still developing, I'll tell you that too. My goal isn't to sell you anything, it's to translate research that's often locked away in dense academic journals into something you can actually use tomorrow morning. So let's start with the biology, because once you understand what's happening inside your brain, the rest of this video will make a lot more sense. There are 3 biological processes you need to understand, and I promise to keep this simple. The first is oxidative stress. Think of it like rust forming on metal. Every day, your cells produce small amounts of unstable molecules called free radicals as a natural byproduct of energy production. In small amounts, this is normal and manageable. Your body has its own defense system, antioxidants, that neutralize these molecules before they cause damage. But when free radical production outpaces your body's defenses, cellular damage accumulates. Brain cells are especially vulnerable to this because they use so much energy and contain high amounts of fat, which is particularly susceptible to this kind of damage. The second process is chronic low-grade inflammation. This is different from the inflammation you get from a cut or a sprained ankle, which is short-lived and protective. Chronic inflammation is a slow simmering process that can persist for years, often without a single obvious symptom. Diets high in refined sugar, processed grains, and certain industrial fats have been shown in research to promote this kind of low-grade inflammatory state. Over time, that inflammation can affect the blood vessels that supply the brain, and it can influence brain cell health directly. The third process is blood sugar regulation, and this one deserves special attention when it comes to breakfast specifically. When you eat a meal high in refined carbohydrates and low in fiber, protein, or healthy fat, your blood sugar tends to spike quickly and then crash. These swings, when they happen morning after morning for years, have been linked in research to insulin resistance, a condition where your cells become less responsive to insulin's signal to absorb sugar from the blood. This matters for the brain because insulin resistance affecting brain tissue specifically has been studied extensively in relation to cognitive decline. Some researchers have even used the term type 3 diabetes to describe this brain-specific insulin resistance, though I want to be careful to say that this remains an active area of research rather than settled fact. The encouraging news is that all 3 of these processes, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and blood sugar swings, respond to diet. And breakfast, because of its timing and its tendency to be repeated with little variation, is one of the most powerful levers we have. With that foundation in place, let's look at the components of a truly brain-protective breakfast, one piece at a time. 1. Eggs, the overlooked source of a critical brain nutrient. For decades, eggs had a complicated reputation. Many people over 50 grew up during an era when eggs were treated with suspicion because of their cholesterol content, and some still avoid the yolk specifically, scrambling only the whites out of an old habit formed from outdated dietary guidance. Here's what more recent research has clarified. For most healthy adults, dietary cholesterol from eggs has a much smaller effect on blood cholesterol levels than scientists once believed. Large nutrition reviews published over the past 15 years have generally not found a strong link between moderate egg consumption and increased cardiovascular risk in the general population. But the more interesting story for brain health isn't about cholesterol at all. It's about a nutrient called choline, found almost exclusively in the yolk Choline is a building block for acetylcholine, a chemical messenger in the brain that plays a central role in memory and learning. Research published in nutrition journals has found that a large percentage of adults in the United States don't get enough choline in their diet, and this gap tends to widen with age. The people most at risk here are older adults who have spent years avoiding egg yolks specifically, along with anyone eating a diet low in animal protein without a specific plan to replace choline from other sources like soybeans or certain leafy vegetables. What should you do instead? For most healthy adults without a specific cholesterol condition diagnosed by their physician, 1 to 2 whole eggs most mornings is a reasonable, well-supported way to provide choline alongside high-quality protein. If you have a heart condition or your doctor has specifically advised limiting dietary cholesterol, that conversation should guide your choices, not a general rule of thumb. 2. Berries, small fruits, with an outsized effect on memory. Most people think of berries as simply a healthy fruit, lumped in with any other fruit choice at breakfast. It seems like a reasonable assumption, but it actually understates what berries specifically appear to do. Berries, particularly blueberries and strawberries, are rich in a class of compounds called flavonoids, plant pigments that give the fruit its deep color and that appear to have a specific affinity for brain tissue. One of the more well-known lines of research here comes out of long-term observational studies following large groups of older adults over many years, which found that those who consumed berries more frequently showed a slower rate of cognitive decline compared to those who rarely ate them. The proposed mechanism involves both antioxidant activity, helping to manage the oxidative stress we discussed earlier, and a separate effect on the communication pathways between brain cells. Some laboratory research suggests these flavonoid compounds may help support the growth of new connections between neurons, though this remains an active area of ongoing study. The people most likely to be missing this benefit are those who rely on fruit juice as their primary source of fruit, since juicing removes much of the fiber and can concentrate sugar without preserving the same flavonoid profile as the whole fruit. What should you do instead? Aim for roughly a cup of whole berries at breakfast, fresh when in season or frozen the rest of the year, which research suggests retains most of the same beneficial compounds. Frozen berries are not a lesser option here. In many cases, they're picked at peak ripeness and flash frozen, preserving their nutrient content quite well. 3. The refrigerator staple. Almost everyone gets wrong: flavored yogurt. Now here's the one I mentioned earlier, the item sitting in nearly every senior's refrigerator that deserves a much closer look. Yogurt has an excellent reputation, and for good reason. Fermented dairy products contain live cultures that support the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive tract that we now understand communicate directly with the brain through what researchers call the gut-brain axis. This connection has become one of the more exciting areas of research in cognitive health over the past decade. The problem isn't yogurt itself. It's the specific product most people over 50 have been buying for years. Individual cups of flavored low-fat yogurt, often marketed with words like light or fat-free on the label. Take a look at the nutrition label on one of these cups sometime, and you'll often find somewhere between 15 and 20 grams of added sugar in a single small container, roughly equivalent to several teaspoons of table sugar. Here's why that matters specifically for brain health beyond the blood sugar swings we discussed earlier. Research on the gut microbiome has found that high sugar intake can shift the balance of bacteria in the gut towards species associated with inflammation, potentially undermining the very benefit that drew people to yogurt in the first place. You end up consuming a product with a health halo around it while working against the mechanism that made it healthy to begin with. The people most at risk are those who've eaten the same flavored sweetened yogurt cup for breakfast for years, often believing they're making a lighter, better for them choice compared to something like eggs or full-fat dairy. What should you do instead? Choose plain, unsweetened yogurt, ideally one labeled as containing live active cultures, and add your own flavor using whole fruit like the berries we just discussed, along with a small amount of cinnamon or a drizzle of honey if needed. This gives you the fermented, gut-supporting benefits of yogurt without the sugar load working against it. We've covered eggs, berries, and the yogurt mistake that catches nearly everyone off guard. But we still have several more pieces of this breakfast to go, including one ingredient that's been quietly studied for its effect on the exact blood vessels that supply your brain, and a pantry staple that most people think is neutral, but actually works against you every single morning. If you're finding this useful, I genuinely appreciate it if you took a moment to subscribe. This channel is built around translating peer-reviewed research into practical, everyday guidance without hype and without selling you a supplement. It helps more people find this kind of information when you do. All right, let's keep building this breakfast. 4. Extra virgin olive oil, the fat most seniors still avoid. Many people over 50 came of age during the low-fat era of the 1980s and 90s, when fat of any kind was treated as the enemy. Even though that guidance has shifted substantially, the habit of minimizing all dietary fat, including healthy fat, has stuck around for a lot of people. Extra virgin olive oil is one of the most extensively studied components of the Mediterranean dietary pattern, which has been linked in large clinical trials, including a well-known Spanish trial that followed thousands of older adults, to a reduced rate of cognitive decline among participants who consumed it regularly compared to those on a lower fat comparison diet. The mechanism appears to involve a combination of factors. Olive oil is rich in monounsaturated fat, which supports healthy blood vessel function, and it also contains polyphenols, plant compounds with antioxidant properties that appear to specifically support the lining of blood vessels, including the small vessels that feed the brain. The people most likely to be missing out on this benefit are those who cook primarily with heavily processed vegetable oils, or who avoid added fat altogether in an effort to reduce calories, not realizing that the type of fat matters as much as the amount. What should you do instead? A tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, drizzled over eggs, mixed into a smoothie, or used to saute vegetables alongside breakfast, is a simple way to incorporate this research-backed ingredient. Look for oil labeled extra virgin specifically, since this indicates minimal processing and higher polyphenol content compared to refined olive oil. 5. Whole grains and oats, getting the carbohydrate question right. Carbohydrates get a confusing amount of contradictory advice, and breakfast is often ground zero for that confusion. Some people have cut carbohydrates almost entirely, worried about blood sugar. Others still reach for a bowl of highly processed breakfast cereal, believing that because the box says whole grain or shows a heart check symbol, it must be a smart choice. The truth sits in the middle, and it depends heavily on the specific type of carbohydrate. Research consistently distinguishes between refined carbohydrates, which have had their fiber largely stripped away, and intact whole grains, which retain their fiber structure. Steel-cut or old-fashioned rolled oats are a well-studied example of the latter. The fiber in oats, particularly a type called beta-glucan, slows the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream, helping to avoid the sharp spike and crash pattern we discussed earlier. Observational research has associated regular whole grain consumption with better long-term cognitive outcomes compared to diets higher in refined grains, likely connected to this effect on blood sugar stability, along with the additional fiber's benefit to gut health. The people most at risk here are those eating instant, heavily processed oatmeal packets loaded with added sugar, or boxed cereals marketed with health claims despite containing refined grains and significant added sugar per serving. What should you do instead? Choose steel-cut or old-fashioned rolled oats rather than instant varieties, and prepare them with water or plain milk rather than the flavored pre-sweetened packets. A half cup of dry oats cooked, paired with the berries and a source of protein like eggs or plain yogurt, creates a stable foundation for blood sugar throughout the morning. 6. Leafy greens, an unexpected breakfast addition. If I told you to add spinach or kale to your breakfast, you might picture something unappetizing. But this is one of the most consistently supported findings in the research on diet and brain aging, and it deserves a place on this list, even though it's the least conventional. A well-known long-term study out of Rush University Medical Center followed older adults over several years and found that those who ate at least one serving of leafy greens daily showed a notably slower rate of cognitive decline compared to those who rarely ate them, an effect researchers described as comparable to being several years younger cognitively. Leafy greens are rich in specific nutrients, including folate, vitamin K, and a compound called lutein, which accumulates in brain tissue as well as in the eye. Lutein in particular has drawn research interest because it appears to concentrate in the same brain regions involved in processing information efficiently. The people most likely to be missing this benefit are those who think of vegetables as strictly a lunch or dinner food, leaving an entire category of protective nutrients out of their first meal of the day entirely. What should you do instead? A handful of spinach blended into a morning smoothie, wilted briefly alongside your eggs, or simply eaten raw as a small side salad is enough to work toward that daily serving. The taste is far milder than most people expect once it's incorporated into a savory breakfast dish. 7. Nuts and seeds, small portions with a concentrated benefit. Walnuts, almonds, and flaxseed often get treated as a snack food rather than a breakfast component, something reserved for an afternoon handful rather than the morning meal. But research on nuts specifically has found some of the most consistent associations with heart and brain health of any food category studied. Walnuts in particular contain a plant-based omega-3 fatty acid called alpha-linolenic acid, along with vitamin E, an antioxidant that has been studied for its potential role in protecting brain cell membranes from the oxidative stress we discussed at the start of this video. Observational studies have linked regular walnut consumption with better performance on cognitive testing among older adults compared to those who rarely consume them. The concern many people have is caloric density, since nuts are relatively high in calories for their volume. And this is a fair consideration, but the research suggests that when nuts replace less beneficial sources of fat or refined carbohydrate rather than simply adding on top of an already large meal, the calorie concern becomes far less significant relative to the benefit. The people most at risk of missing out here are those who avoid nuts entirely out of calorie concerns, or who consume heavily processed, sugar-coated, or salted varieties rather than raw or dry roasted options. What should you do instead? A small handful, roughly a quarter cup, of raw or dry roasted walnuts or almonds, or a tablespoon of ground flax seeds sprinkled over oats or yogurt is enough to incorporate this research-backed component without overloading the meal on calories. Let's bring this all together, because on their own, each of these 7 components is helpful. Combined into a single breakfast, they represent one of the most complete, research-supported approaches to protecting brain health available through diet alone. We started with eggs, an overlooked source of choline that many older adults have avoided unnecessarily due to outdated cholesterol concerns. We moved to berries, small fruits whose flavonoid content has been linked in long-term studies to a slower rate of cognitive decline. We uncovered the flavored yogurt mistake, a product with a health halo that often carries enough added sugar to undermine the very gut-brain benefit that made yogurt appealing in the first place. We discussed extra virgin olive oil, a source of monounsaturated fat and polyphenols studied extensively in Mediterranean diet research and linked to better blood vessel and cognitive outcomes. We looked at whole grains, particularly steel-cut or rolled oats, and how their intact fiber structure helps avoid the blood sugar swings that refined grains and processed cereals tend to cause. We covered leafy greens, an unconventional breakfast addition supported by research showing a meaningfully slower rate of cognitive decline among regular consumers. And we finished with nuts and seeds, concentrated sources of plant-based omega-3 fats and vitamin E that have been consistently associated with better cognitive performance in observational research. If you want one simple picture to take away from this video, imagine a bowl that combines a base of cooked steel-cut oats topped with a handful of fresh or frozen berries, a small handful of walnuts, a spoonful of plain yogurt, and a side of eggs cooked in a small amount of extra virgin olive oil, perhaps alongside a handful of wilted spinach. That single bowl touches on every mechanism we discussed today: stable blood sugar, reduced oxidative stress, gut-brain support, and specific brain nutrients like choline and lutein. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet overnight. Start by swapping just one habit this week, whether that's replacing your flavored yogurt cup with plain yogurt and real fruit, or switching from instant oatmeal packets to steel-cut oats. Small, sustained changes tend to outperform dramatic short-term overhauls, both because they're easier to maintain and because the brain benefits we've discussed today accumulate gradually over months and years rather than overnight. If you take a medication or have a diagnosed health condition, particularly involving cholesterol, blood sugar, or kidney function, it's worth a quick conversation with your physician before making significant changes, simply to make sure these adjustments fit well with your individual situation. Take a moment and think about someone in your life, a parent, a spouse, an older neighbor, or even yourself 10 years from now, who could benefit from this kind of information. Brain health isn't something we tend to think about until we notice a problem, but the research is clear that the choices we make years in advance are the ones that matter most. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What does your typical breakfast look like right now? And is there one change from this video you're planning to try tomorrow morning? If you found this helpful, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Evidence-based health information only helps people when it actually reaches them. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and I'll see you in the next video. This video is intended for general educational purposes only and does not constitute personalized medical advice. It is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified healthcare professional who is familiar with your individual medical history. Before making significant changes to your diet, particularly if you have an existing health condition, take prescription medication, or have specific dietary restrictions, please consult your physician or a registered dietitian.